Looks like everybody's here. So first, I want to thank everybody and welcome to the Collaboration for an Inclusive Recovery convening. My name is James Johnson-Piett, and I'm Principal and CEO of Urbane Development. We are a venture focused on building the conditions for lasting community wealth in historically disinvested communities through research, advisory, and place-based investment. Germane to this conversation, we're also an MBE here in New York that operates a Caribbean marketplace with 33 micro-entrepreneurs. So selfishly, I am very excited for this conversation. With that, I'm going to pass this off to the co-sponsors of our event, Sam Jung from the Mayor's Office of Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprises, and Janique Druces from JP Morgan Chase & Co., who will give us some additional context for today. So Sam, I'll start with you.
Thanks, James. First, I want to thank Deputy Mayor Thompson for his vision and sponsoring of this initiative, Christine Corella and Rosa Stefano, who really were the champions and helped to get this program off the ground. The original community practice members for believing in the power of collaboration, our fabulous panelists here, and interviewees that have helped this initiative really become what will become a powerful report after this event. Also, thanks very much to our partners at Urbane. And then just reviewing who is on the line, we see lots of leaders of the workforce space, small business development space, business leaders, thought leaders, policymakers. So just thank you all for making the time. And last but not least, our incredible funder, JPMC and Janique in particular. Just for some context, and before we begin our formal programming, I want to open with the sobering reality that COVID-19 has laid bare the outsized role of race and wealth in determining an individual's exposure to premature death. As our city begins to reopen, we know the impacts of COVID-19 are that Black and Latinx communities locally and nationally have disproportionately died from the pandemic. MWBEs have not received adequate federal, state, or local resources for business continuity, and workers of color have disproportionately carried the burden of sustaining the economy, often in unsafe working conditions while receiving low wages, and have experienced disproportionate job losses. Underscoring the severity of this latter point, it was reported in the New York Times this morning that an astonishing 46% of Black men nationally were unemployed in May. As our city grapples with a parallel crisis of long-standing police brutality and structural racism, what is also clear is that race and economic opportunity, or lack thereof, are also determinants of one's exposure to police violence, as poignantly evidenced by the murder of George Floyd over the use of an alleged counterfeit $20 bill. So as we, as practitioners, business leaders, thought leaders, policymakers, and funders look to recover our economy, the imperative to center equity is more important now than ever before. The challenges of today give us a charge to transform the economy of tomorrow. Do something that it should have been all along, an economy where we treat the businesses and workers we come to know as essential, as truly essential and worthy of our investments. We've generally assumed businesses are formed and then they hire workers that then lead to economic opportunity, yet this logic often subordinates issues of job quality and wealth generation to the imperative of business growth and job placements. In recovery, workers will play a critical role in whether and how a business is able to reopen and thrive. And in an uncertain future, the perspectives and investments of workers are critical to business success and thereby our economy's success. As practitioners in the ecosystem, we have to support the synergy between business and workforce development. And what I've seen in the Community of Practice initiative is that the assets, talent, and leadership to drive interdisciplinary business development strategies that uphold job quality, worker voice, and wealth generation in New York City in service of an inclusive recovery and closing the racial wealth gap is not only possible, but it's also already happening. These days, I've found myself often wondering, how do we move forward from here? And as I've engaged in this conversation with many of the smart and powerful leaders in the city, many of whom are on this call, I've come up with a rather simple answer, which is we move forward together. Because what I've learned is that all we need is who and what we've got. So with that, I want to say a final thanks to you all again for participating in this call. We've convened an excellent group of panelists, both from the small business development world, workforce development world, an entrepreneur, and also folks who are actively innovating within the space to provide all of us with much needed food for thought and hopefully some field building insights that will be an value add for you and your work. So with that, thank you again for your participation and attendance, and I'll hand it over to Janine.
Thanks, Sam, and welcome to everyone that has joined, I think, this very important conversation today. You know, a lot of what you said, Sam, really just like strikes home. But I would also say it's pretty amazing to be on the right side of history. We started this work a long time ago with the amazing people, you know, that are on this panel with the mayor's office, just looking to do the right thing at the right time. And that time is now for that work to come to its full fruition. And so for those of you who don't know, my name is Yannick Druces. I'm a program officer at JP Morgan Chase, sitting in the foundation, and my colleagues and I are very happy to be here today and to support this work. Our nation, as Sam said, is experiencing a time unlike any other. Many of us were not alive. I would venture to say everybody on this call was not alive the last time we've seen an economic downturn like this. Many of us, if you were alive, were very young the last time we've seen social unrest to this degree. So this is definitely, I think, new territory for all of us. And I'll just want to give a couple of stats. So there was a recent report released by JP Morgan Chase, the JP Morgan Chase Institute, that found that 44% of New York City small businesses have less than 14 cash buffer days. We are now into month 4 of this pandemic. And as is no surprise, that situation is more dire in Black and Hispanic communities. Specifically, 95% of small businesses in majority Black communities and 89% of those in Hispanic communities operated with a cash buffer of less than 2 weeks. Another research study found nationwide that a quarter of small businesses ceased operations from February to April. That number, again, is amplified in communities of color. 41% and 32% of Black and Latinx owned businesses shuttered respectively. So again, those two communities rise to the top. And Sam talked about unemployment, and we know that unemployment rates have skyrocketed across the country. They're starting to come down now a bit, but the pandemic continues to grow, so we'll see what happens. But again, that effect was more pronounced in Black and Latinx communities. And unfortunately, these communities have also experienced the most deaths as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So as a member of the Black community, I can definitely say that this is not a place where we want to be first. Not at all. But really, all of these facts just go to highlight the systemic inequities that have been resident in our society since its inception. And that underscores the importance and the timeliness of this body of work that we're going to talk about today. This body of work that started way back in 2018. So yeah, over the years, JP Morgan Chase, we developed a model for impact using Detroit kind of as our testing lab to work towards a mission of inclusive growth. That model is really focused on 4 strategic pillars: jobs and skills, neighborhood revitalization, financial health, and small business expansion. And that reflects what JP Morgan Chase believes are the essential ingredients for creating lasting impact for our communities, customers, and employees. This is all about inclusive growth, and we call it our model for inclusive growth. And, you know, just to not belabor the point, I just want to say that we are really happy to support and encourage collaboration between 2 very important sectors: the small business sector and the workforce development sectors. This crisis has highlighted the fact that they are inextricably linked. I think in a way that those that have been a part of this effort have seen, but that many others, they started to acknowledge, but didn't really make the connection for. And so just excited to be here, looking forward to these two sectors to work together and chart a path forward together. And so with that, I'm just going to turn it back over to James so that we can get right into the heart of things.
Thanks, Janique, and thanks, Sam. You took the words out of my mouth. I think the interesting opportunity point right now is, workforce and small business ecosystems, need to figure out a way to better align towards a more equitable economy. This conversation is urgent. The need for collaborative thinking amongst these stakeholders, to take a turn to action is really become an urgent and pressing need. It's all hands on moment, so we're here to talk about the framing and the ideas of how practitioners, the city, and the funding community can move forward thoughtfully. We have 5 really great experts here to lead the conversation, but we'll definitely make sure that everybody on the call has a chance to chime in and through the chat as much as possible. This whole exercise is really an opportunity to have an open and generative conversation and session around these ideas. So the outcomes we're looking for from the convening, every insight from the panel discussion to the input that we get through the chat and the Q&A, they're all data points that we're using for our research project that are going to be codified in the report and a call to action that's going to be released this summer in partnership with the mayor's office in JP Morgan. We hope that we'll hear lots of ideas for MWBEs and frontline workers that are relevant to your work, especially ways to activate collaboration among different partners in workforce and small business work streams. So we're going to spend a couple minutes introducing the panelists, and then the audience will get a chance to answer an introductory question in our chat. We're going to spend 45 minutes in a panel discussion. Obviously, during that time, you're more than welcome to submit questions to our panelists or to the Q&A. Then we're going to close out the session while allowing panelists to address the audience's questions directly and hearing from you about what your priorities are, and particularly around calls to action moving forward. So with that, I'm super excited to do some introductions for the panelists. So given our timing, we're going to ask the panelists to give their name, the organization, and their role, and one top priority for an equitable recovery for small businesses or workers, a challenge that you feel should be at the top of the agenda that needs to be addressed. I know that's a big ticket question. We were talking about this yesterday. It's a lot to chew, but give it your best, and we'll go from there. So we're going to start with Nancy. Nancy, we're having a hard time hearing you. Not sure what's going on.
He's probably muted, can't hear you.
Yeah, you might be on mute. Are you on mute?
It looks like she's on mute.
All right, we're gonna let Nancy figure that part out. Let's go to Spurgeon.
Hello, no problem at all, Nancy. We'll come back to you. Spurgeon Robinson with Impact Strategic Consulting. We are a firm that has a lot of experience in compliance and labor compliance in particular, growing and developing MWBEs. Have done a lot of work in the New York City area, but also we work nationally as well. As we discussed about how to, make a difference with the particular workforces where I was focused on and where we're focusing on is how we make their jobs more quality oriented, knowing that the demands that they're going to have to now face with increasing customer service to a delivery point where, now we're asking them to do more things around cleanliness and sanitation and things that they normally would not be a part of their jobs, but also got to feel like how that's so important and critical to the current business model and adapting to a new business model. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, as well as the fact that how do MWBEs and other small businesses redefine their offerings in this new environment where there's probably less physical contact or group settings as well. So I'll pause with that. I'm sure there's a lot more that I was going to add.
Excellent. Thank you, Spurgeon. We're going to try Nancy again. Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
I hear you. Do you hear me?
Perfect.
I switched computers. One of them has a better video, but this one obviously has a better audio.
Excellent.
Thank you. So again, I'm Nancy Karen. I'm the founder and executive director of the Business Outreach Center Network. We're a network of local business outreach centers in all 5 boroughs of New York City, with offices also in Long Island. And we are also have an affiliate, Bach Capital Corp, our CDFI lender, and we work with minority, immigrant, and women entrepreneurs throughout New York. I would say that, the biggest priority right now is connection, we need to connect with the entrepreneurs who need the resources, who don't have the time and wherewithal to manage and navigate all of the opportunities that all of us are trying to develop and deliver. And that connection is critical. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. All right, Tomas, you're up.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Tomas Duran. I'm a partner at Concerned Capital. I'm also a researcher at the University of Southern California Center for Economic Development, where I work with manufacturers in the defense supply chain. I think for me, the top priority for equitable recovery is self-determination and empowering the communities, Black and Brown communities, to have a say in what happens next within their own lives. I think the shortest path to that is employee ownership and helping people own the businesses where they work.
Excellent, thank you. All right, Tiffany, you're up.
Sure, and thanks to Urbane and the New York City Mayor's Office for the invitation. My name is Tiffany Ferguson. I'm the program director at an innovation lab called the Workers Lab. And our purpose is to give new ideas that increase worker power a chance to succeed and flourish. And the primary way through which we do that is running a prize competition called the Innovation Fund a couple times a year. And our goal with that is to really surface and map the ecosystem of innovators, people who don't always consider themselves innovators or entrepreneurs, people who look like the way our workforce looks like, people who come from communities that are not always represented in conversations about what do we need for the future of work. And what they're doing are building, testing, experimenting, and learning about new tools, new approaches, strategies, products, programs, and services that, if successful, might really position workers to be the powerful drivers of decision-making and transformation that this country needs. And so the priority that I would offer for the conversation is two things. One is, when we even say the words equitable recovery, we don't have a precedent for equity in this country at all. So we need a new North Star, and we're going to a place we've never been, and we don't know how to get there. And so to get to a place we've never been, we've got to center some people we never center, and one, that's workers. This country at many, many times in the last hundreds of years has diverted sharply away from centering workers' interests. So I would say, let's do that. And then in order to do that, we have to be agile, because we don't know how to do it, and we'll have to learn in real time and course correct over and over and over to make sure and be accountable to centering that worker voice that we have to learn how to do.
Excellent, thank you, Tiffany. And finally, Brendan.
Thanks, everyone. Hi, my name is Brendan Martin. I'm the executive director of The Working World. I'm a co-director of Seed Commons. We are an organization that is financing and high-touch technical assistance for people who want to own their own business as a worker cooperative or ESOP. We've been doing this for about 15 years. We've put well over $10 million into workers' hands to own their businesses, and we've been working with businesses converted from traditional ownership to worker ownership for the last 15 years. You know, everything everyone said is the right challenge. When we phrase it, you know, we think we've already spent, we're going to continue to spend extraordinary amounts of public money to rebuild the economy. And as we take our collective resources and spend them to build that economy, can we think about doing it differently? Can we not just give that money to people who already own businesses, hoping that good jobs will be the byproduct, but instead think, like the way Tomas was saying, think of workers as the center of that. Think of them as agents who could create their own good jobs. Worker ownership isn't just an ideal, what is morally the right approach, but it is when we're spending all of our collective money. But it's also a solution for current business owners who are trying to retire in record numbers, in companies that are going to close unless someone steps up to try to run it, like the workers, and in trying to address the, as of yet, never addressed problems of inequity that Tiffany was mentioning. It's one of the few chances we have for a massive redistribution of wealth from a mostly white male and very small population of owners into a very broad, much more diverse population of workers.
Thanks, Brendan. I think what's really fascinating about all the answers is, you know, we're talking about the emotional, the tactical, the strategic, and really the visionary. It's really running the gamut of all the different ways in which we have to think about getting at this problem around equity. And to Tiffany's point, even definitional, we have some really clear work to do around defining what these terms are for a new normal, a new North Star. So it's exciting to kind of have this conversation as a place where that can happen. So speaking of definitions, let's talk about job quality. There really isn't a widely agreed upon definition for it. It can mean many things outside of the obvious question of pay scale. How can we think about defining job quality in the context of COVID-19 and the current unrest that's tied to racial equity? What elements need to be part of that thinking? What I'm excited about with this conversation for sure is, this is sort of just in time thinking, how do we move the conversation that we've been having for the last couple of years around job quality into a current context? So I'll let anybody wants to jump in, or I could pick on someone.
I'll jump in. I think I'd be in trouble with the folks at Aspen if I didn't address it. I'm a job quality fellow from last year with Aspen. And one of the things we often talked about was pay was at the lower end of the scale for job quality from the workers that they surveyed. And what they found was the ability to have a flexible schedule and dependable scheduling, knowing when they're going to work, and but also the ability to make adjustments for childcare issues, which are going to be huge. And I have school-age kids, and it's a conversation I've had to enter into with my clients and the work that I do at the university, because they're going to be home several days of the week, which is a brand new thing for us now. So I think quality going forward is going to look like meeting the employees where they are and addressing the challenge that they see every day in their everyday lives.
May I jump in? I think that's 100%. And when we were exploring job quality recently in our business peer exchange, you have to consider the different types of workers and their individual needs, but also involve them in a more transparent environment where management, we're in a very tight crunch. Liquidity is not there for these businesses. And not only do we have to address the financial issues, but when the financial issues are impacting a business, the transparency and discussion with the workers and bringing them into the conversation around decision-making and pivoting and innovation, as well as their individual needs around childcare and scheduling. All of these things layer on to job quality. And I think that it's very important, the communication function and the way management changes their interaction with the workforce as a collaborative.
If I can make a couple of points as well, that flexible scheduling is actually one of the key points as mentioned. But also people want to see clear paths to job expansion, promotion of people that are also of color in particular. That's something that they want to see more equitable growth in and expansion of. And I think seeing more leaders at the top that are from minority or reflect the minority community or the local community is also important. But also we have to address issues like remote access and the availability of technology in the home, reducing the digital divide or providing access to technology at home where people can work just as efficiently, whether in the workforce or equally as efficiently as others who may have less of an impediment to that digital divide.
Yeah, folks are really stealing my thunder here. But yes, if you want to know what job quality is, don't try to figure out a definition. Ask your workers. They'll usually tell you what makes a quality job. And if that feels like a stretch, ask yourself, right? Like, what makes your job great and helpful and quality, right? You get benefits, right? Because our system is so traditional still that it attaches benefits to the employer. And so for some of us, we win the good boss lottery and we get the benefits that we need that are right sized for our lives. That's not true for a lot of workers and worker owners, right? And so I think asking workers what they need, if we can even sort of conceptualize treating workers with the same type of precision and sophistication that we imagine our consumers, right? So this idea that it's too complicated to try to serve every worker's need. We serve lots of consumers in business, right? We serve the people who have the time and don't have time, people who have some money and little money. And a lot of times you'll sort of zoom in on a particular kind of target market. But the same is true for workers, right? Workers have a host of diffuse needs, whether they are younger or older, whether they have college educated or not college educated, whether they have sort of trade skills or not have trade skills, whether they have limited English skills or not, whether they have a car. Like there are so many things that sort of a worker will say, hey, my job will be better if I had a job description, if I knew what my job was, if I felt like I was contributing to something bigger than me. My job would be better if I had dignity, if I felt like people would back me up and treated me like a human, but instead they treat me like a cog, as if I don't have to use a restroom, I don't get breaks, I don't deserve a safe working environment. Like there are a lot of things that I think we assume are sort of baseline fundamental things that all jobs offer, and they just don't. And you'll find very quickly that many workers don't have these things. And so if we are willing to ask them and willing to listen to what they say their needs are, the next question there would be, what is our obligation in the business ecosystem to serve those things? Are we accountable when we don't serve those things? And the answer is often no. And there's a lot of reasons why that's true, but I think sort of asking them, figuring out what they need, and taking the responsibility and what the purview of the business is, right? Businesses have lots of tools. They have lots of tools that they don't really realize they have, and levers to really meet people where they are. And I think that sort of reconceptualization of what a business's responsibility and obligation is to its workers is one that we might begin to center as we think about recovery.
And you know, Tiffany, when we spoke to our businesses about asking the workers these questions and about looking at them individually and more targeted to who they are and what they need in a workplace to feel meaningful and valued, and they were just amazed that they could go and do that. They didn't even realize as managers and owners that they could go and do that. And when they realized they could do it, they did amazing things, and things really transformed for them. So supporting the owners to realize that is part of their role, that is something they should do and can do, and that they haven't really necessarily thought about in the past and didn't have this really the toolkit around that as well. So that's really an important way to achieve a meaningful change.
I'll throw on, as Tiffany said, there were a lot of thunder was already spoken. I mean, that was agree with everything people said. Maybe as opposed to having lost thunder, we gained a storm, because I was agreed with all what we just heard come. I mean, you know, and obviously highlighting what Tiffany talked about, and Nancy just piggybacked on, having worker voice is one of the best ways to lead to worker to job quality. And you know, it's hard to just manufacture money out of nowhere, but as Tomas pointed out, salary isn't the highest thing that people necessarily look for, and being able to have those choices to make a big difference, which is one of the reasons that worker ownership can so often lead to higher quality of job to people. But I want to highlight one thing in particular in there. It's still about worker choice, but a specific one that we see with COVID: stability. You know, we can see now how it matters a lot more than just a bonus. Stability is the thing that matters. And when you're in a traditionally run company, per workers, it is costs. And we work with a lot of just normal for-profit companies, and the first thing is, who can we get rid of? It's just how they have to work. Literally, the federal government with the payroll protection program had to bribe, that's the case, and I know businesses that took the money to bribe people to not fire the workers. So please don't fire them, here's the money. Now, I don't know any cooperatives that did that. When you're in a cooperative, again, you can't magically make sales show up or revenues, but you get to choose what's the priority. And the last thing on the list is let's fire ourselves. And all the cooperatives we've worked with since COVID-19 has hit, none of them have fired people. A few people have left, some have shrunk a tiny bit, but almost all of them figured out other ways to cut costs. Whereas almost all the for-profit business, that was the first thing they did, was fire people, and the PPP is one of the few things keeping it. So that kind of stability you get is one of the key components of job. And when workers are in a position to make that decision, they will make that their priority.
One thing that we talked about yesterday in our sort of prep, and Spurgeon, I'm gonna pick on you a little bit, is the need to sort of marry this idea of stability with the tumultuousness that happens around the need to cope with change. You know, from a tactical perspective for COVID, there's a lot of operational changes that are going to occur in the workflow. So if you want to talk a little bit about sort of your thinking around how the workers' ability to cope with that, and sort of practical answers and solutions to kind of tackle that issue.
Yeah, so some of the things we're looking at is just the new approach to how frontline workers are, in particular when we talk about retail environments and very focused customer service areas. You know, how their interaction with these customers is so important, from ability to make sure and have the confidence that the place is, you know, clean and sanitized because of the COVID epidemic and people's expectations that they want to be in a safe environment. And there's such a critical function to that now happening, right? So these are things that are now added to their job functionality, and they have to be appreciated for the fact that what they're doing and the investment they're doing for the bigger picture of it all. So it gets back to, like I said, that dialogue and that communication we talked about, and also that transparency, as we use that word a lot, to make sure that people and the workers feel appreciated, and more so from just appreciated, understanding that this is part of how our new business model operates, why it's important for everyone to chip in, even from the top level down within our organization or anyone's organization. We still have to maintain some, impact around how we are sanitizing areas, cleaning after each other, watching over things, making sure we're wearing masks and stuff when we're not remote. Those things are all important and have to set that leadership example from the top. But making sure that employees now that you're asking them now to do more now, because guess what? We're still asking them to do their regular job, but now we're also asking them to say, hey, let's also maintain a safe environment consistently and consciously as well, and understand that our customers or our others are going to expect that of us. And also we're going to have to make sure that in this new dynamic, whether people who do not want to comply, we have to make sure that we understand that we have to approach them differently and understand why, from a health and safety reason, why it's so important. So integrating them into that conversation, understanding and make sure they are valued because of this, as important that is toward the business model, is just as important as delivering safe food or anything else that you're doing in that sense, that this is also a new dynamic that we also have to be a part of, appreciated with, and somewhat, even thinking from a compensation perspective as well, how important it is. But that's, I'll leave that subject alone for now. But yes, others may have other things to chime in on that.
No, that was great. And I think about, our marketplace. We spend a lot of time thinking about how to get people prepped for just being able to come into the door and sort of the natural sort of impediment points physically when it comes to people's health and the mental sort of strain that workers and our entrepreneurs have in their spaces. Are there any sort of tricks or things you guys are thinking about around like dealing with the sort of mental toll and the physical kind of health tolls around what people are going to be encountering coming forward with COVID as we open up? Bueller? Anyone? Well, it's interesting from our end of it. We've been.
Unless somebody, Thomas, I'll just quickly say, so some of the things we're thinking, and these are just not, making sure there's availability. I mean, the little stuff of just making sure that the availability of things that they need to ensure that areas are now being cleaned. The fact that you're communicating with them on the purpose and why you're doing it, that helps with the mental psyche of it all as well. And maybe even doing simple things. And I said, we look at tone and music sometimes we play in retail space has a calming effect around the place. And maybe we need more of that nowadays as well, versus like the political jockness of TVs and stuff that we look at. Maybe different ways to approach and refresh the environment that they're walking into day to day. But get that feedback from them is just as important.
Well, I think too, what we're seeing, and most of my clients are manufacturers, and what we've seen is the ones that have responded well and are managing this process well is they have a very active HR team that goes in and talks to the employees about what their needs are. Some of the employees are transit dependent, and the idea of taking transit right now is terrifying. Others are older; they're close to retirement age. And so they're concerned about, continuing to come into work and, getting sick. Now, most of these manufacturers are, they were essential in terms of the stuff that they were making. So they had to continue to operate. And the nimble ones were shifting and accommodating different work schedules and doing things that were taking into account those concerns that the staff had and that the employees had. And the other ones that we saw were just going to power through like there was nothing. They just had people resigning or not, disappearing because, they felt like they weren't being heard and would rather take their chances somewhere else.
And in New York City, where most businesses are 20 employees and less, or even 10 and less, where we don't see HR departments who can step in and take that role, the owner really has to create an environment where there's time for reflection, for shared concerns. And actually, through that kind of time and effort set aside, you really see innovation and problem solving coming up from everyone together collectively. A reflection is an important aspect of this recovery for workers and owners.
And I would just quickly offer some ideas we just saw in the Innovation Fund we just closed, which we asked the question, how are we thinking about the supports workers need to sort of get things done, realize their aspirations? There are ways that sort of what folks are saying right now is like the employer can sort of facilitate that sort of reflection and surfacing of worker voice. And then there are lots of other ways that we go outside of the employer, right? So in the same sort of traditional employee assistance program, but really reimagining what that looks like for low wage workers. There was a project that was saying, hey, in rural North Carolina, lots of Black essential workers have no access to any kinds of like medical help. And so we want to develop a telemental health service program for those folks. We also saw sort of a care organization developing a message, like a web-based chat line for care workers who have always experienced isolation, both physical, sort of the conditions of working 24 hours, taking care of someone in their home. There's lots of issues with home-based care work, right? And so they developed a chat line that gives people an opportunity to talk about work, right? Like, I don't know how to bathe this person when they don't want to bathe, or give them an outlet for the mental, sort of emotional challenges of the job. And then the connection to that sort of worker on the other side of that chat line gives them access to resources, tell them where they can go, tells them what their rights are. So I think there are ways that it's really important for the employer to sort of facilitate that and aspire towards creating a workplace where people can openly share what their concerns are. But there are also, we have to have other kinds of mechanisms for accountability, right? And so those are usually the things that we're seeing people come up with, building from the ground, who are workers or people who have worked in those sectors and say, hey, this is a gap in our system and we want to fill it. And I think for the intermediate question that we'll get into next, that might be a space where workforce development folks can start to step in, because we've never seen that from the workforce side. So I just want to put that out there.
You are the perfect assistant. That was a nice dime you threw, but we're one question away from that. So before we get to the intermediaries, I want to talk about the business owners a little bit more. And I'll say, this is all really great. I think about what Nancy said about the majority of businesses in New York City, they're less than 10 employees, and oftentimes maybe even less than 5. So their infrastructure to do a lot of this stuff is going to be challenging. How do we make the business case for job quality in this moment when there's already so many challenges that MWBEs are facing with the pandemic, reframing the conversation around unrest? How can quality jobs benefit a business in a moment where, to Brendan's point, where the government's having to bribe them to keep their workers in? And in their mind, they can't think about the stresses of job quality when there's more quote imminent sort of issues in place. So I'd be curious about what you guys think about that. How do you make that business case to employers at this point?
I think you have to start with happy employees are more efficient. And you have less. There's studies that show there's less losses. There's increased productivity. There's all kinds of stuff. But it's also helping the owner understand that the challenges of meeting payroll, managing insurance, dealing with sales, dealing with accounts receivable, all those other things can be alleviated a little bit by having employees that are not only happy to be there, but are also taking pride of ownership in the business too. Whether it's formal, or it's just something that they're invested in themselves. And so I think that it creates an environment that's more conducive to growing that business, and not one where that business owner feels isolated and they're doing those things by themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Tomas, what he said, there's in the specifics now. Which business do you feel good about going back to? The one where the workers look like they're all packed in and don't have masks, and business has done nothing to take care of their workers? I see a place where the working conditions look like they've thought about all the innovations people have said. That's also where I'm going to go back and patronize. It is. I mean, it's a better case than ever. It's like workers who are not well taken care of during COVID are going to give their customers, exposure to COVID. It's not. it's it's such an easy question of you've got to take care of workers now. It's the only way that you're going to be able to continue start trying to sell products again. And there's a lot of arguments for how the efficiency that goes up. I think what happened, the problem is often owners are still just thinking about next quarter. The investments we talk about in job quality might pay off in a couple of years, and especially now, they're like, I don't know, I just got to make ends meet. So sure, I could do it to an offset and have happy workers, but what about paying rent next month? And there is a lot of pressure on folks, which is why also, we're not just thinking about how to convince current business owners to do the right thing, but who are the next business owners? There was already a crisis of $10 trillion worth of businesses that were going to go away because their owners were retiring and didn't want to sell it to. That was before COVID. That was about to happen. We had a silver tsunami. It was an unemployment crisis as high as any of the automation promises, and probably more acute and worse. And it's only gotten even more acute and even worse since COVID. So there are trillions of dollars of businesses on the table that we don't have to try to convince the owners, come on, it's really worth the investment into quality jobs, but just convince them it's time to sell to your workers, and have the workers have the voice to create the quality jobs. So we're not just trying to convince field owners, and it's really the pitch we're making is not just think like the whole economy is beholden to the current business owners and how can we keep bribing them with money. Let's use the collective money we have to the next question, the kind of intermediaries and others that help usher in tomorrow's kind of businesses. I'm thinking Green New Deal. We're talking about worker ownership. We're talking about, what are the new businesses of tomorrow? And it's the workers who can lead that forward, not just the current owners.
I think the business case for better jobs, better quality jobs is a given, but people don't know about it. They don't realize it. And perhaps we have to think about strategies to tie other resources to management development so that the quality jobs business case, it becomes, when you start a business and you're thinking about your product and you build your business and you have no real management education and you don't understand some of these principles and you haven't seen the impacts, it's hard to, use those tools. But if we tie those tools into other programs that we deliver to businesses, then whether it's financing, whether it's, on-the-job training grants, whatever it may be that we have tied into the systems that we create and have already created, if we tie in the quality jobs component, I think owners will get on the bandwagon because this is a value proposition. This is there is a business case for this, and all, it's there, it's right there. We just have to figure out how to move it into all of the different programs that we deliver.
I guess I know this is very sort of high level, but whenever I hear this question, my question is, if we're not making the case, if the business case is not job quality, what are we making the case for? Like, what's the counterfactual case we're making by saying, hey, we can't do that, that's too crazy, right? Is it the short-termism, profit? Like, what are we actually saying in our country, in our local economies, in our ecosystems when we say, we just can't pay people. We just can't treat people with dignity. We just can't, we don't have time. We have so many other things that we're grappling with. I think for me, I'm ready for us to sort of move from the place where we're trying to convince people that we should be centering people, right? And like really start leaning into, what are you centering here? What is your North Star? What's your goal? What are you trying to do here? And tell me how you're getting to that, because I think a lot of the answers are whatever they're centering, they're not even doing that well, right? Because there's all these other things they're grappling with and they're just kind of struggling, catch as catch can. And so I think my priority at the top of this is if we center a central thing, which my argument is workers, how do we get there instead of trying to back people into this strange sort of reality of like, that other stuff you're doing is working for our communities and our economy. It's not ours. I don't want to go back to the economy we were 6 months ago. I don't want to get back there. And 7 months ago, all of the questions were, unemployment's really low. There's so many things we can't do. We will always find reasons that we can't sort of center people in our work. And I think if we start putting pressure on folks to think about what it could look like for them to center people and exposing them, to Nancy's point, to what other opportunities are there, making it more normal to do this, making it like normalizing this conversation. It becomes less, what's the business case and sort of what am I losing by not investing in this?
I have to say that businesses at all levels, and including ourselves, have adapted technology at such a rapid pace due to the virtual work that we're now doing. And there's a big opportunity now with the shift in the way work is done and the way we are coming back, and the need for safety and all the different levels. There's a big opportunity for management education that will enter into this moment of change, and people are open, and it's a very important time.
Before we move on, I just want to make one quick practical point. Anybody who's doing contracting with the federal government, who's receiving a federal grant, who's working in defense supply chain or healthcare or anything like that, you're going to have to meet federal requirements for cybersecurity. And the business case that I make with the manufacturers that I work with is your greatest threat to cybersecurity is not some hacker someplace else. It's your employees that aren't paying attention, that are being careless, and that are doing things that compromise your safety. And so one of the things that makes a business more competitive is having employees that are not only informed, but that are treating the business with some level of investment so that they're paying attention to it, which allows them to remain more competitive. And so, I mean, the business case is it's going to become more and more apparent as we move forward, and those cybersecurity restrictions become more and more as people start checking more and more on the cybersecurity of those things. And that's the today. That's the tomorrow. Those are the things where I agree with you, Brendan. It's hard to sometimes get a business owner to convince that they should do things because it's morally right or because it's going to help them down the line. This is competing tomorrow. If your employees aren't on board with what you're doing, if they're not paying attention, they're not invested, it becomes a disadvantage to you and makes you less competitive. So in cybersecurity, I bring that up specifically because it's expensive. It's a cost. You're not going to recuperate that cost. It's something that you just have to do. It's part of doing business. And so getting them to start thinking about it in those spaces has been effective for me to help them move forward in terms of doing things that are going to get their employees more invested in treating the business more like something to protect.
So I'm curious about how employer engagement looks like, given all these constructs. How do we get the small business owners to the table to have the conversation?
Well, I would offer, oh, you want to go, Brendan?
No, please.
One way is the convener has to be a certain kind of person, right? It has to be a trusted, whether it's an intermediary or not. My previous job was at the Federal Reserve in Boston, and we facilitated conversations all across Massachusetts with mostly small business owners to talk about job quality, but we didn't talk about job quality, right? We asked them what their challenges were. We asked them what their pain points were, sort of in a tight labor market, right? What are you feeling? Tell us what's going on, and giving them an opportunity to sort of air all their challenges, right? A thing that they enjoy doing, but they don't always get to do and feel like they're heard. And so there's a sort of dynamic of basic human dynamics of like, what's the best way to sort of collaborate with someone? Well, it's to build a relationship with them. It's to cultivate trust. It's to listen. It's to make sure, actively listen, and make sure they know they're heard. And so we would start the conversation there. Tell us what you're feeling. The labor market's really tight. Minimum wage is going up. We know there's a bunch of constraints, right? And they start there. And then we get them to tell us what you're doing to solve those things, right? And then they start to hear a different kind of set of answers from their peers, right? Oh, well, we tried this and we tried that. And they're like, whoa, I never thought anybody would want to stay in this frontline job. That I thought our retention problem was just a problem, a foregone conclusion, right? And so I think part of this, people will always say, well, how did you get to talk to 100 businesses in 2 months or something crazy like that? And it was because we know the power of what it means to be an intermediary like a central bank, right? Whether people even understand what the central bank does or doesn't do, we were a new party in the room that they don't normally talk to. And so we were able to bring other parties that are always clamoring to talk to them or on the receiving end of the negative stuff like the state or the Workforce Development Authority and facilitate a new kind of conversation. Now, how you sort of convert that currency that you build and rapport that you build there into more intentional sort of TA, and getting them to be more innovative, getting them to try new things, getting them to open up their books to you. That again is relationship building. I know Nancy and Tomas, they're the people who are sort of participating in that process, but I just wanted to flag that the convener really matters, because people are really stuck in these constructs that they typically work in.
You know, we found that once we're engaging with a client who needs capital, all of a sudden we're embedded in a conversation about their company as a whole. And then as our relationship can develop from there into being that trusted advisor around management issues, around worker quality, around workforce, around technology and all the other things. I think that when it comes to, you know, MWBEs who lack access to conventional capital and they go to the CDFIs have a major role to play in becoming part of the ecosystem around job quality and supporting management education as well.
I just want to add, for us, we specialize in bringing capital and capacity to underserved communities. And so people come to us in dire need. And then we help them work through that process. Why are you in dire need? What's happening there? And go through that process. And a lot of times it's, they don't no longer want to put their own or risk their own personal treasure. So really what it is a need for succession planning and for what's next. And that, but it's having something that they want and having the credibility to be able to provide that and help and leading them down that process that allows us to have those kind of relationships. In the work that I do with the larger manufacturing community though, manufacturers are really hard to get into the door with. But what we've did is we partnered with their the primes, Northrop, Boeing, Lockheed, and had them tell us who's important to you, why are they important to you, and what are their challenges. And using that credibility, we were out and get to the community. That works everywhere. There's always somebody that your businesses are reliant on for something, power, water, some sort of service. And those stakeholders can be a path to those businesses to start working with them. It's not going to be 100% response, but if you send out 1,000 invitations and you get 50 responses, you're doing pretty good. So I think it's being strategic and understanding your business environment. Who are the major players? Who are the stakeholders? And how can you use that relationship to your advantage to get access to those businesses?
I want to add in something to try to piggyback on things people say, because again, agreed. Good panel put together. I agree with everybody. And also Janika is like must be the fastest chat box participant in the West. And there's some really good comments she's made. And organization, one thing she highlighted, and that's what we're talking about here. But so how do we make sure it sticks? One of the problems always happens, well, we have this rhetoric, job quality. You know, it's like politicians get up, I'm going to make the country better. And then you keep saying, oh, the same thing keeps happening because there's something systemic underneath it. And sometimes those systemic things are really abstract and hard to pinpoint. There's a really specific one here, though. You talk to business owners about job quality, but then they're still using the most fundamental business planning or business strategy tool you have, your financial model. And in a financial model, jobs are all costs. You're all driven by what's my cost here? And how do I cut? Oh my God, payroll is so high. And even when we as like CDFIs, which we are, and others, sometimes we want there to be quality, but then we'll still look at like what's the bottom line look like with that financial model, and what is an actual cost here. And there are other ways to do that accounting. I mean, one way is in worker ownership, the workers are below the bottom line. The bottom line matters to you there. The profits are yours. There are other ways to approach that. And I think if you continue just to use rhetoric about job quality, but then you don't look at their books a differently, you have to look at like, what were your investment in workers? What are the long-term forces of improving your bottom line that comes from that investment in workers, rather than just seeing them as a cost? You're going to keep finding words going one way and actions going another. But I'd highlight what Nancy and Tomas and also Janika was saying. You know, capital is such a need here, and most businesses that are small don't get great capital from just the public markets anymore. And there's an incredible amount of capital pouring in from the public coffers. How do we invest in our community and look at those books differently? How do we actually not just say we want job quality and keep using old school methods of measuring them, but measure the quality of jobs they're putting in so that owners, they get it both sides. It's reinforced by the financial model we use. And we can do that with the leverage we have as capital providers.
right, I'm going to jump in because I'm super excited about this conversation. Brendan, you brought something up that's super important to me. I talk about this a lot with my entrepreneurs. The nature of your P&L is not static. You can think about how you structure your P&L and what goes above and below the line in lots of different ways that you just fashioned. What's interesting is the conversation needs to happen not just with the employer, but also with the underwriter and the other folks who are thinking about providing capital, right? They have to be able to do due diligence and underwrite and think about how to, frankly, fund this new modality around sort of our business models. So I'm going to lean us into that intermediary conversation because I think that's where the road meets the road. The intermediaries, the CDFIs who are thinking sort of ahead of this and being creative and innovative around this. What can happen at a systemic level where the idea of job quality is not necessarily just on the business owner and maybe not even just on the intermediary, but what's the systemic opportunity to take the pressure off these actors and make it more of an ecosystem play, and whether that's going to be public policy, so Sam, focus on the city, or even funders like Janique and others who can sort of support these experiments kind of going forward. And actually, I want to give a shout out to the community of practice. There is some definite work that's happening right now, so I won't steal all your thunder, but creating some of those definitions that we talked about that makes instituting metrics a little bit easier for intermediaries and businesses to be able to test the outcome is going to be super important. And we've definitely heard from both intermediaries and business owners about the benefit of peer groups about sharing infrastructure as well. But I'll definitely want to hear from you guys around what's been the learnings around the business community of practice and how do we get to this more systemic change when it comes to job quality. I may pick on Nancy and Brendan to start this one.
Nancy, please.
Well, I don't want to just jump over the peer group topic that you just brought up because peer group exchange and engagement with expertise and with guidance and with money and with financing, it becomes very powerful agent of change. So we need financing in order to support MWBEs in places where there are real significant sizable opportunities, especially with the government contracting. We're in a unique market in New York with enormous goals. There's enormous opportunity, but the capital access isn't, needs to meet with the, match. It all has to match. When you match the capital with the opportunity, then you need the peer group and you need the management education and you need the ongoing support. Because as we all know, as businesses grow, they reach plateaus of different challenges, and especially around workforce management, especially around worker engagement, that becomes one of the biggest challenges they never met before as they grow. So that peer group really helps businesses grow into their size. And that's one of the things that I think is really critical. And I think that came out in the community of practice. I love the community of practice. It's a core value in a lot of our organizations around New York City. And the fact that we had that experience together is very powerful, and it helped us engage more intensively with one another as well.
Yeah, I know. I could add to that only that so everything that Nancy said is what's beautiful about that kind of infrastructure, and we need to. How do we multiply that up a lot? I mean, this country used to have an industrial policy, and we sort of said we don't need to invest in infrastructure, industrial policy, and all that. The economy will take care of itself. No one thinks that anymore. And how, especially as like the question you asked earlier, how do we help businesses pivot? What are the organizations out there that are support to small businesses who don't get help from banks like they used to, what are the organizations that can help actually bring to life visions like a Green New Deal? Visions now much more even, simple, like recovery from COVID, responding to the needs of racial inclusion and racial and economic justice. Businesses aren't going to be able to do that on their own. They need to pay their bills. It's organizations that support them that do that. And again, once upon a time, we invested very heavily in support organizations and support infrastructure for businesses. And we had, a much better economy. There were a lot of blind spots we had during that time, and hopefully we've seen some of them and can do it better this time, but we have to invest in them. And people who say the money's not there, and then they suddenly have, a couple $1 trillion to spend. The money's there. It's what we choose to focus it's just about priority. It's just, is it our priority or not? And now I don't think we can say it's not our priority to help businesses figure out how to become the businesses of the 21st century that build the world we want.
I see a comment and a question in the chat. And the fact that MWBEs are at the low end of the totem pole and get abused and get cheated often. And then the question about systemic change, really the government side needs to make sure that doesn't happen. You know, we try to advocate, we have lawyers who might help out a little bit, but this advocating and you know, back end, you know, attempts to solve these problems is not going to work. The government has to put a stop to prime contractors abusing the MWBs. They just have to.
I was going to add to that, from looking at as a, you know, small businesses, as entrepreneurs, and what some of the challenges are, access to capital that makes these things happen. We also have to get to a greater, I think, instance of funding local and community banks, and allowing them now to be able to meet the needs of those smaller and local businesses that are in their community that they have built a relationship with. And that allows, I think, the entrepreneurs and the small businesses to also be able to tell a different story. Tell a story beyond the numbers. They have to tell a story about their employees and how their customer base is important to them, how that will be sustainable with the investment, the proper resources and capital that they allow to them. And I think smaller and community banks, and we found a lot of success in our business with those, have a more attentive nature to try to understand more than just what's on the P&L statement, more than what's on your DUNS report or DMB scores. Like some of these larger banks, it's a checklist for them. But your smaller regional local banks, you build those relationships, and everything comes back to relationships, like I've seen and comment in the chat box and we've all talked about. But I think empowering and infusing capital into those local community, smaller banks will allow smaller firms and minority-owned firms that are in these communities to kind of also thrive and have a resource that they can go to and they know personally that will help them succeed as well. So I think those are some of the things that also are very important to that, breaking this systemic function of using large banks to provide capital, and when they say no, we're dead in the water. You got to find different ways to solve that model.
You know, since we're here in New York City and New York State, I would like to say that there's a law that New York State has kept on their books, despite all other states getting rid of it, the scaffold law. It creates an insurance requirement for small contractors that matches the requirement for large contractors, because the risk is exactly the same. And as a result, the contractors can't bid, they can't compete, and they can't manage their businesses. And I think this is a place where labor and business need to come together, because the labor unions have supported the scaffold law because it, quote unquote, protects workers, but it actually pushes workers into a very uncomfortable position of not even having jobs, because the price and cost and risk is so great to construction projects in New York that they don't happen. So I just want to say we should get rid of the scaffold law in New York State.
Any ideas around the city, since we have the mayor's office in the room?
I'm going to go high level again here. No surprise. I would say, again, to get to kind of recovery that we've never been to, we need to create way more spaces and containers for experimentation, right? Like, we need to normalize it. We need to make it very normal that, hey, I'm going to try this thing. It could be crazy. Somebody might think it's crazy, but I want to try it. And the risk to me of not trying it is too great than the risk of not doing anything at all. And so I would say there's lots of opportunities for intermediaries themselves to be more innovative and experimental, whether they are small business services providers or workforce development providers, right? To Brendan's point, and in Spurgeon, you just said this, like small businesses are forced to operate within the same sort of financial construct that exists for all business in this country. And what we know is this line of like, there's two economies, right? Some businesses are raking it in. And when we talk about business being terrible and evil, we're actually talking about a few like mega businesses, right? And then there's a whole bunch of others who are just getting by. And so I think what we've allowed ourselves to believe and accept is that we all have to operate in the same model. But I would offer that we can reimagine the financial models and constructs that small businesses, and then small businesses can be the ones modeling the behavior for bigger companies. Small businesses can be the ones modeling how to put workers at the center and still be profitable, right? It may or may not mean you'll be super, super duper profitable or not, right? And I think that reimagining, even with the goal of business, is possible for this ecosystem and for the set of actors who are so vested in this ecosystem. And so, you know, one question I would ask is, how are we all responsible for workers being safe at work? How are we all held accountable to that? It's not just enough to sort of place a worker in a job and say, hey, good luck, and then decry that it's not safe, or decry the statistics about the disproportionality of people of color or Black people or women, right? We all have a responsibility here to say, what's my job in making sure workers are safe? And what's my job in making sure they have access to recourse when they're not safe? Because all employers aren't benevolent, and all employers don't necessarily know what to do or how to facilitate that. And so I think making more containers for experimentation for all of us. Experimentation and innovation costs money. That's why we exist. You know, everyone wants to say they're innovative, but everybody's not, because it takes time, it takes risk. It sometimes takes money, but sometimes it actually costs more in willingness to change and then reflect on like who I am, why I do what I do, why our business is built the way it's built. And sometimes that actually costs more. Shifting the mental model is more costly than the actual like dollars to experiment with something different. And so we need infrastructure to take risk. We need facilitators and experts to help ensure people are learning along the way. And we need people really willing to sort of stand at the vanguard in the bridge and say, hey, what we're doing and imagining is not enough. We must push more. We must ask for more. We must center workers. We can't keep tinkering on the edges here. And if we keep tinkering, we're going to get the same economy we had before or something worse. But to get something better, we've got to really, really push the boundaries and get uncomfortable, because when you start shifting and centering workers, it gets really uncomfortable. Power dynamics change. You're no longer the expert. You're no longer defining the policies. And folks who work with worker owners, like, this is what you navigate. And so I think that the ecosystem needs to be willing for all of us to push our boundaries, and the city can make that happen. Foundations can make that happen. And businesses can pool funds to create those spaces, right? They're not absolved from sort of deploying their resources either, even though their resources may be sort of limited, right? So that's all I have on that.
So thank you, Tiffany. Go to Thomas.
Yeah, I'm not in New York right now. I'm in LA. But one of the things we share with New York is crazy real estate prices, and yours are way crazier than ours. And I know that what drives a lot of stuff that happens here locally with our businesses is the cost to rent space, the cost for brick and mortar space. It also creates challenges for accessing customers, but where they end up deciding to locate, or the ability to aggregate enough land to build a space so that you have an economy of scale to make your business work. So one of the things that I would advocate, and which I do locally too, is just a place-based economic development strategies. They're going to look at how do you use different tools available to you now that you can make a change in your space tomorrow around creating land trusts, supporting crowdsourced funding to bring additional capital in that doesn't have the restrictions that the banks have, or that doesn't have the restrictions that the private equity people are, or they require the returns that the private equity are doing. And the crowdsource part is hard because the people who are in that space may not have the insurance requirements or all the other requirements to operate in that space. And so the city can come in and provide connections or relationships to move that forward. But doing those things to ease or create a little more space around the business operators so that they can have a little bit more luxury of time to think about job quality and do those things and enter into those spaces like Tiffany's describing to think about the big picture. There's a number of strategies, I think, like the transfer of development rights that the city uses. You can have that be donated and use those things to generate funds to create permanent spaces for incubating local small businesses. But I think it's going to have to come back to a place-based strategy with your local experts who know what those challenges are and what the resources available to you to meet them are.
That's a great point to sort of lean into our Q&A. And I think one point I'll make quickly is the point you just made, Thomas, about capital, even outside of the public or the foundation realm. is super important. When we talk about patient capital, what does that mean? The structure of what you need for working capital. We need more providers who can do credit servicing. So you're not spending 30% APRs on the credit card to try to make ends meet. Those infrastructure pieces that sort of, you're in the small business services world, you understand, but we don't have the sort of long tail set of intermediaries who can take that sort of work on. So when we talk about experimenting and creating a container, is going to be, to Tiffany's point, really interesting opportunities to reimagine underwriting, due diligence, servicing, the whole sort of financial arc for small businesses. And then at the same time, think about how workers plug into that new modality. So, for venture, for sure. I mean, all we're really, in my mind, all we're really saying is, how do we make civic innovation a venture opportunity with the same set of risks and the same set of tools? Because there's a much more creative tool set around financial services for venture than there is for more traditional small business. So with that, I'm going to move to the Q&A. We got some questions from the group. This is a long one, so bear with me. What is the city's responsibility in creating a workforce pipeline that meets the diverse needs of NYC small businesses? Is there an opportunity to train a workforce not only intended for hiring small businesses, but one that may serve as outside of service providers for small businesses to create economies of scale for critical services and functions? Think e-commerce, marketing, et cetera.
Let me just jump in real quick, because it's not a complete answer, but it's something that I did locally with my Main Street buying co-ops and you can do this now virtually, because you're all using tomatoes. So get a bunch of people to buy the tomatoes and buy it at a scale that saves you the money that you're using individually in those different places. And then co-op insurance pools that allow you look like a larger organization, but you have a number of people connecting virtually to do those things. And I think it's the shift to e-commerce isn't going to eliminate brick and mortar. I think it's going to change how it works, but there's still going to be a lot of things that are operating there, and the brick and mortars can use a lot of those virtual networks to reduce the cost of their operations.
Nancy, you gonna go?
This is just a thought. We train home-based childcare providers in business management practices, and they are essentially their own worker, and sometimes they have several employees. We let the employees come to the business management classes. This really transforms the employees. They get to understand the business. And what we've noticed is when you have workers go through an entrepreneurship training, a business management training, not to become clerical workers in a business, but to understand how business works, they really are more valuable workers in the future. And I'm just saying that not necessarily looking at the skills that a specific job requires, but training workers in business, manage, what it takes to run a business, all the different aspects of business can be really valuable to an employer and to that person and their career.
Spurgeon, or?
Yeah, I was going to touch it back to almost job quality in a certain sense. So I look at it as, especially smaller businesses, we have employees that have to wear multiple hats, have to be on rapid fire and jump into, solve problems immediately, help out in areas they haven't worked before. And to me, translating that ability to say, there are no borders here or specific silos in which you operate in, becomes very valuable to if you're transitioning to with a larger company or one working in that area where you now develop a certain skill set that you're able to be very multifaceted, and vice versa, coming into an environment where you're allowed to expand your creativity if you go into a smaller company, because we need so many things done and we need to be able to have them done in so many creative ways, kind of now allows the back and forth flow at where we fit best and what, once again, job quality, right? Is this a place that I would rather be because of the fact that the environment is more conducive to allow me to expand or grow, et cetera? And I think those are things. And as far as like in workforce and where we're training people in these educational institutions, and we got to realize too, education is going to change also due to COVID. and how we deliver education, I would say, and training. And so in looking at workforce now that may approach the environment as what can I do that's different from what I've done before? How can I expand beyond the traditional silos of education? How do we get that and allow those now templates of learning to be more creative with less boundaries and restrictions? I think those are things that are going to allow us to continue to evolve the workplace dynamics and also allow people to be very creatively not siloed anymore. I think you're going to see a lot of new opportunities coming from that as well.
Just a couple of quick things I'd say onto it. You've seen the way it's framed. What is the city's responsibility in creating these pipelines? I mean, the good thing is the city its responsibility is whatever the populace wants to vote for. So if we think it should be responsibility, it could be. And I think it's a really good idea, the suggestion to think about what is our strategy, not even responsibility, what is the best strategy to support a vibrant economy for the most New Yorkers? And I like the way it's thinking of not only small businesses, but the ways to network them. A lot of times municipal actors think about how can we get this giant business to come? And the reality is most jobs aren't created by the giant business. And the giant business comes and goes, it demands tax breaks, et cetera, it gets given ends up controlling your city. And thinking, like to Tiffany's point, thinking creatively and innovatively and thinking about small businesses, which are the engines of most job creation. They're also in trouble right now. And so how to support them through networking like that, through not just direct workforce training for the business, but for the organizations that support the business, thinking of that kind of vertical integration. You know, like we're working on a childcare network now, rather than giant childcare centers or just isolated tiny childcare businesses. You have local childcare businesses who can provide quality care, get to know the children, the parents, be close at hand, but then are still part of a large network, which can help with compliance, things like that. That kind of network, thinking of scale, not just as a lot of small actors working together, and a flexible network is really good for the municipal actors to be thinking of. So I'm glad they're on. So it's a great suggestion in that way and where it gets us thinking.
Thanks all. And so I'm going to invite the audience to make sure that they share their top priority call to action. So similar to what we did with the challenges above when we first started, you know, what is your one top idea or solution that you want to prioritize for equitable recovery for businesses and workers? So, you know, while we're talking, definitely throw that into the chat. So I have another question for the group. What additional or even new metrics can be teased out to more clearly see the value of ecosystem itself for all or for particular stakeholders? And this is keeping in mind the intermediaries and the value of your work. You know, how do we talk about metrics in terms of the intermediary space? Anything you guys did in the community practice that might be useful here around metrics?
Can you paste that question into the chat?
Yeah.
Oh.
You know, metrics is one of those things. You know, you set up a set of metrics and you kind of drive towards those metrics. And unless you have a bigger vision within your structure of your organization and your thinking, you're not going to do the other stuff that needs to get done. So we're all about metrics every day of the week, but innovation and metrics have to be married and in a creative way. And I think we have to look at that very carefully, because changes that a business may make to improve the quality of their workforce, let's say flexible schedules and the whole remote stuff and all the things that have been talking, safety and all that, that's not going to show up on their revenue necessarily. It's not going to show up on their access to capital. It's not going to show up on their number of workers. But yet the, let's say an intermediary, let's say Spurgeon helps a business transform. How is that metric going to be reflected? And to me, I don't have the answer, but I have that question.
There's another different metrics I look at. I would think we start looking at. I mean, these are things that are not normally what, like I said, we look beyond the numbers, but things like employee retention. I mean, that's very important, because businesses that are able to keep employees and grow, since there's a success model there that's somehow embedded past the numbers. A business that have been in business for a while, there's a success model in there, and the fact that they can go through cycles of change, right? So there are other ways we look at it other than what the net income is or what your inventory turn ratio, all these other ratios. Start looking at businesses from a people or customer and employee perspective, and understanding, okay, how are they able to continue to grow? How are they able to continue to go through these cycle changes, retain employees, have high customer satisfaction, get repeat business, other things that we need to look at that are more germane to a business overall success. And with that, I think that the city, and in particular New York City, does, I've worked across the country, and in New York City, unique in the sense that it does a very good job, I think, of providing capital access to small businesses. Now, the loan, the fund, the bonding fund as well. But I think we now need to also increase the size of opportunities to these small businesses so that we're looking at, more than the $100,000 job over the year. Why don't we actually have an expanded capacity where these businesses can invest in their employees, invest in their infrastructure, have a sustainable revenue flow, understanding that there's a larger size of capacity that they can handle. And this helps feeds a lot of mouths, and in the common sense to say it, but other things are very helpful. So I think as a city looks at ways to reduce the capital burden that businesses are trying to overcome, how about also increasing the size of the opportunity that they can invest in as well?
I think this is a great opportunity to start measuring some other wild and crazy things. And so I would offer the audience, because there's a thing that happens when people first come to the job quality conversation, and they're like, let's prove to businesses that retention costs them money, right? And so I think the caution here is sometimes we have to acknowledge that people are, while economics would want us to believe, people do not operate in this rational mental model that we think that they do, right? And so just because it costs them a lot of money to turn people over, they may not value the money that it's just cost of doing business, right? I hear this, oh, people don't want this job, no one wants to work in this industry anymore. It's always going to be turnover. So quantifying a thing that we think a business values is not necessarily a guaranteed road to like a gotcha, to like them turning themselves around and saying, let me invest in that. And so I think this is a great time to sort of escape that construct of or to acknowledge that we tend to measure the things we value. And so when we aren't valuing things like increased confidence by home-based childcare providers who are taught that who by going in and providing them technical assistance to run their business, now they don't just feel like a powerless immigrant who nobody cares about. Now they don't feel like a person who can't hold it all together. They feel like a business owner, and that is sort of a byproduct of that kind of work. And so those are qualitative things that there's lots of those kinds of things that are out there to measure. And this is why I stress so much talking to workers, right? Because workers don't just go to work because of what they get paid. They go because the scheduling is stable and predictable, income is stable and predictable, because there's dignity at work. People treat them with respect, right? People are making calculated trade-offs all the time. And so I think there's an opportunity to measure new things. And if we give ourselves a North Star, I don't know, whatever we would want to decide, I've said a few of them today, we can start to measure other things, and we can find the data points available to us to measure those things. So beyond the how many did we place in the job, beyond the how much revenue did we get this year, beyond the how much cash reserves do we have, right? All important things, but again, things that are attached to the value system of the financial model that we are trying to escape.
When we did our business peer exchange, we went to the businesses and spoke to the employees, and we didn't speak to them about what was wrong, but we spoke to them about what was the owner of the business doing right for them? What did they value about that relationship and that job with that owner? And then we brought that information back to the peer exchange and told the owners what they were doing right. And it was just really a revelation to them. So Tiffany, I couldn't support your comments more, that we have to be really creative about this.
All right, folks, I wish we had more time, but we're running out. This has been a really incredible conversation. So thank you all for sending questions in and participating via chat. I always find it's really fascinating trying to create a good balance virtually, but I think we've done that today. So thank you all for that. With our 3 minutes left, I'd like to ask each panelist the one recommendation, top idea, call to action you want the room to know. Can keep it as relatively brief as you can. Thanks. Tiffany, actually, why don't you start because we talk about the North Star.
Whoa, I wasn't ready. I would say think about the future you think we're trying to get to, and figure out where you stand on the, are we centering workers or something else? And I think that'll start there, and it might lead you down a new little rabbit hole, but I would say center workers no matter what.
Yeah, Tiffany said, oh, sorry, go ahead, Spurgeon.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Well, exactly what Tiffany said. And so think outside the box, center workers, finance workers to buy out companies from owners who are leaving anyway.
I would say one of the things I was thinking about would just be a leader in this space, in the sense that let's continue to expect more from our government participants, from our lending institutions, challenge them on things that are perceived as barriers before, and let's make sure that we continue to push them to accelerate, to allow our visions, our creativity, our business to grow and to thrive, our employees to increase their job quality and quality of their efforts as well. So don't let it relax and get back to the status quo and norms we talked about. Let's be leaders and innovators in this space and continue to push forward and forward-leaning ideas and innovation. And let's not step back into the status quo.
And I would say I agree with everything that everybody's been saying. I would just add, listen to the workers, listen to what their needs are, and see how you can meet them where they are.
And I would say invest in communities of practice where organizations are committed to learning and innovating and listening and engaging. Invest in engagement at many different levels.
Thank you all. My last point will be, many micro entrepreneurs are also workers in many respects. Those Schedule C's are tough for small folks to kind of penetrate. So part of the conversation can be, as a small business owner, you also are a worker. So understand that space. Anyway, this has been great. I think we're on time. I want to thank each and every panelist. So Nancy, Tiffany, Brendan, Tomas, and Spurgeon, thank you so much for your time, your expertise, for the conversation. I want to give a shout out to our team at Urbane for putting this all together. Again, I think it went well. So all the flowers are for you, particularly Maggie Clark, who's been really doing the yeoman's work to pull this all together. So thank you guys for that. Thanks to our sponsors, the Mayor's Office of MWB Services and JP Morgan Chase & Co. Thank you all. We will definitely be back in touch over the summer as we're encapsulating all this research and great data that we're collecting to create a compendium of information around best practices and calls to action. So hopefully we'll be able to lock that in and put some of this out there for folks and to be able to take home and actually develop opportunities around real change in this space. So thank you so much.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Urbane.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Everybody.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Brian. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.